is the Bearcast, presented by Bird Culture Ford. Bird Culture Ford has been in Waco since 1936. Ford is the #1 selling truck in Texas 43 years running. The Bearcast is also presented by WellMed Medical Management and USMD Health System Dallas. Here's Craig Smoak and Grayson Grundhoefer.
And welcome into the Thanksgiving week edition of the Bearcast on Sikkim365.com. Also, the Baylor Athletics on Sikkim365 page, which is where you are finding us live. Tuesdays at 11:15. Already getting ahead to Thanksgiving later on this week, but Tuesdays at 11:15, and that is where you can find us on the YouTube channel, but also after the fact via your favorite podcast feed, however you are getting us. We do appreciate your time as always, and thank you for being a part of the show. If you would, just hit like and subscribe, and we would kindly appreciate that. But Craig Smoak with you as always, Sikkim365.com, writer and also a show host, and joined as always by Grayson Grundhoefer, Director of Broadcasting at Sikkim365. You even got a little cameo there from Jack in the background as well as he runs the mothership. But Grayson, Thanksgiving week, one more week to go in the regular season after a loss to TCU that we will be talking about here over the course of the next several minutes. 42-17 Frogs over the Bears. We'll get to that, but just how you feeling this week, man?
I mean, thank goodness this season is almost over. I mean, I need Thanksgiving.
That's what you're thankful
for?
for?
So, yeah. I mean, this has just been a just dreadful year, and it just has gotten worse and worse and worse, and just kind of ready for this season to be over and see what direction Baylor goes in after this year. I kind of have my mind on kind of where that's going, but I think that we're still all kind of waiting to see exactly what ends up happening by the end of the season and what Mac Rhodes decides to do and kind of where the Baylor program goes from here, because it's been that bad of a year. I mean, to be honest, I know they have 3 wins, but you could point to those 3 wins kind of being fluky, to be honest, outside Long Island.
Yeah, I don't know really what you're even accomplishing by pointing to the 3 wins and trying to make an argument of any sort. It's like, okay, so they won 3 games. What is your point? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not like it's good. So, yeah, cool. So, yeah, that's not even an argument that really does anything to prop up what has, been a very long, trying, just difficult season. 3-8 now, the record. Wins over UCF and Cincinnati. Both of those went deep into the game in the case of Cincinnati or UCF especially, and then really the only game that you quote unquote dominated was Long Island, and you didn't even really look all that great doing that. So we have not really seen a great performance from them all year. Maybe like the Utah showing until the end. You could say like games where they played relatively well. But as far as like a 4-quarter game and getting the win and then turning that into something else, like that has not happened at all this year. And so, yeah, here we are. It's week 12, one more game to go, and then regrouping in some form or fashion with the offseason, with the decision obviously to be made on what you're going to do with your coaching staff and what you're going to do with your roster eventually, and what all that entails. I mean, that's going to be the part to sort through, but there will be no bowl game. We know that. So this is it. This is it on Saturday. And, I hate to say that because I know there's a lot of families and players, and it all means a great deal to them. But, yeah, I'm kind of ready for it to be over as well, just because I've had my fill. We've seen 11 games so far, and we've seen them go 3-8. And so, yeah, at this point, I'm kind of like, I've seen it. I've seen it and what it looks like, and I've kind of had enough of, no more turkey, please. I've already had my 13 or my 12 plates of it.
Yeah, and I feel really bad for these seniors too, because I have a feeling that the attendance for this West Virginia game is going to be brutal, just absolutely brutal to watch, and they don't deserve that. They don't, but it's just the reality of the situation that has occurred this year. And there's some seniors that have been at Baylor for a really long time. You look at TJ Franklin, Gabe Hall, and so that's going to be really hard to see and watch. But, I mean, it's where the program is at currently, just based on this season. I know people want to say write off the program completely because of 1 year, but it's really just one terrible year and obviously a terrible end to last year that have kind of really soured the taste in everyone's mouth.
Yeah, I mean, this is going back a while now. I mean, we're talking, what was it, thrown out the other day? It was like 3-12 in the last 15 games.
Yeah, it's the, what is it? Ever since, it was beat Oklahoma, for the second time in program history on the road. And then just all these losses have been piled on top. And that even includes a crazy good performance against TCU that they just couldn't capitalize on last year.
Yeah, so here we are. It's the last week of the regular season, and you can tell just by us that there's frustrations, there's disappointment, and there's some angst over what the future steps look like. And it didn't get any better with their latest effort. You thought, like, okay, a couple games ago, just try to play as well as possible and maybe even sneak out a win or two. But against TCU, that was not to be the case. And so there are questions surrounding Dave Aranda. Even if he's back, there has to be staff changes of some sort. Even if he's back, there has to be roster changes of some sort. And so, that's all well and good, and that would be a lot easier to believe and get down with if they hadn't done that last year. They just did that last year, all that I just mentioned. And so that's not like the selling point any longer. It's like, okay, well, 2 years ago it was your offensive coaches and some retooling of the roster, and then last year is your defensive coaching and your roster, and this year is going to be what exactly? And so that's harder to sell now because you've kind of already done that a couple of times.
Yeah, that is hard. I mean, after the 2020 season, it was very clear they had to make offensive changes. I mean, that was just brutal to see, and they got those right in my eyes with Grimes and Mateos and the guys they brought in. But now you come full circle to this year, and everyone's like, oh, the offense this and the offense that. And I'm just looking around just thinking, I mean, the defense is not good. The defense is really bad, and I know a lot of the blame has been on, there's just a lot of young guys playing and things like that, and there's optimism about them being better next year. And it feels like the offense is kind of getting a lot of the blame and at times they've kind of looked like the better unit. So I don't know what they're going to do. Honestly, I don't know how they don't make a coaching change at this point. That's kind of where I'm at. Where are you in the same spot, Craig? I think by this time next week, we're probably going to be talking about a new coach. We won't know who a new coach is per se, but I do think Baylor will probably move on. That's my guess.
Yeah, I get the hand-wringing over the defense, and I wasn't real inspired by his comments around Matt Powledge in his one-on-one with Smoaky yesterday, which was just far too long to try and break down. It was far too complicated, but if you want to go back and listen to it, I mean, he gives Powledge like every bit of rope he can, saying that he should help more and do that. But then at the end of it, you just kind of feel like there's no hope there for them to get that turned around, it almost feels like. I mean, just because of the learning gap that's apparently there, but based on the way he was describing of like, I can like lead him to water, but I can't teach him, or whatever the phrase, what is the phrase?
Well, it was you can take a horse to water, but you can't force him to drink.
Yeah, and like that's kind of what it sounded like, and maybe that's not the greatest comparison, but it's like he's trying to help along the way, but there's very much a learning curve, and that's like a big learning curve, and like a learning curve to the point we've seen it exploited in coaching matchups over and over and over and over again this year,
right?
Where guys are out of place, or it's just missing tackles, or it's whatever. So I give you, like with a defensive head coach, granted, defense doesn't look anywhere near where it should be, but I hear from a lot of people about like, well, the offense is not okay. The offense is boring, and you can't run the football. And if you can't run the football in this offense, it is almost entirely ineffective unless you were just having a career day passing week in and week out. So I think that needs whatever, like defense needs changes. I don't know what those are, but offense absolutely does as well. Like the fact that you even had a year where an RVO, off the reliable violent offense that is based on being able to run the football was totally unable to, for the most part, run the football effectively at all this year. Like, and then you have to give me like the little spurt in this game, the little spurt, like we ran the ball. It's like you had like 150 yards. Like that's not what you should be getting.
150 yards. That's being generous.
Yeah, you know what I mean though. And so it's like, that's even trying to get sort of talked up, and it's like they were ineffective at their bread and butter. And so it's everywhere you look, there's issues. So with that being said, and we got other stuff to get to, I thought last week if they at least kept it close with TCU that you were keeping hopes alive that you manage this and be all right on the other end. But like by the end they got blown out again, and they're not just losing games; they're losing games. They're getting blown out by most of the teams they're playing. They're losing to all their rivals, all the in-state schools, even Texas State. The strength isn't a strength. That boils down from your head coach of what his expertise is at. Like that's a total mess on that side of the ball. And then the other side that was, what you felt like could probably at least carry its own weight, like that struggled along all year. Now your quarterback's hurt before the finale. And so, yeah, I feel like after last week, like something, I don't know what, I'm not calling for Dave Aranda's head or anything, but like I just don't know how you can keep doing this the way that it's currently constructed. And I don't know if it's as simple as just changing coordinators, because we've already seen that. We've seen that on both sides of the ball already, and it somehow feels worse this year. So I don't know. I don't want to call for his firing, but like I just don't know how much longer you can go on without just ultimately saying like, well, what else can you do?
Right.
And that's kind of where I'm approaching now.
And I don't think it's calling for it. I think it's just more so just that's where I'm at, what I expect to happen just because of what we've seen. I mean, having a bad year is one thing, but having a year like this is a complete other thing. And the end of last year was also very brutal to watch. And so, yeah, it's hard. And it's hard for me to imagine, you just change a coordinator, now everything's good.
Right.
Whereas it very much seems like, okay, if you change coordinators going into next year, I mean, what's the best you can hope for record-wise? And would that be enough to keep Dave Aranda? Because if it's not, then how do you just run it back? Like, is 6 wins, 7 wins, is that enough? After these 2 years, I don't know.
Based on me looking at that schedule already, that's about what they should hope for.
Yeah,
because they could very well be 1-2 in non-con again, and that Big 12 schedule doesn't look like it's just a cakewalk either. So
10 Big 12 games.
I already looked at that, and I already thought like if I was predicting this right now, I'd at my most optimistic say like 7 wins.
Right, and so is that enough?
And that's based on nothing, obviously, because the team's not going to look like it does now. But I'm just saying, barring some miraculous roster healing and coaching, like brilliant changes that make a huge difference, looking at that schedule, they're going to be, flirting with bowl eligibility again. And that's year 5? I mean, how long do you keep doing this thing? So I think I do wonder if it doesn't come down to like a candidate or two or who would be in mind. That's going to determine what happens there.
Can you land your top candidate? Can you make that change? Can you afford to make that change for whatever direction you're going to go in? Yeah, that's going to be probably the biggest question that has to be answered this week.
If somebody's not out there that you really want, you're not going to fire Aranda just to get a guy and then you're stuck with him.
Right.
I mean, but I think I think it matters who A&M hires. I think it matters who A&M hires, and I think it matters maybe what other jobs are being interviewed for. And so at some point, though, you've got to, like, time's ticking, and you got to make a call one way or the other. You can't, like, just wait on the Aggies to make their move so that you know if this guy's available or not, you know? So, yeah, man, it's I mean, that's the most interesting thing about this, as opposed to the games at this point, is now the talk about the offseason, and that's unfortunate for the seniors. And it's unfortunate that, like you said, it is going to be a very interesting turnout at McLean Stadium on Saturday. Cold front just rolled through, so now it's cold, whereas it's been, like, pretty nice weather for the most part, and it's Thanksgiving week, and they're not a team that's playing for anything other than pride at this point. And so, that's all adding up to what could be not that great of a showing on Senior Day. And maybe Baylor fans will surprise us, and maybe there will be a bunch of West Virginia fans there. We'll see on that. But, it's going to be an interesting showing coming up here on Saturday. And this conversation would be different, perhaps, if they had performed a little bit better against TCU, which they managed to actually perform pretty okay for about a half and about 2.5 quarters is what they managed to get out of this game, out of the 4. And then the last quarter and a half were disastrous, and this turned into a blowout. So let's get into TCU so then we can move on and talk about all of the other things that are really, quite frankly, more interesting at this point, which is all of the speculation. But as we do every week, we do take a look back at the game, and we're not going to go through the whole thing, and I say it sometimes, and we still do, but like literally like the last quarter and a half aren't worth delving too deep into here. So we'll do that. We'll get into some preview as well of West Virginia, and then also answer the mailbag questions this week as well. Appreciate you joining us, those of you along for the ride live or after the fact. But this game started out with a 5-play opening drive that ended in a punt for the Bears after they gained all of 12 yards on 5 plays, punted it away, and this is when things actually started to get a little bit wild. And you thought, okay, well, they got a little bit of fight into them. Opening drive, not great. Obviously, didn't really move the ball effectively. And you turn right around and put your defense out on the field. Young Josh Hoover there at quarterback for TCU, and a sign of things to come, he would hit Jared Wiley for a 17-yard pass right out of the gates. And am I tripping that they are really ineffective at against tight ends, or is that just a thing that I've made up in my head? I just feel like when there's a capable receiving tight end, like they get crushed by that type of a player.
It's happened at times, but not quite like this.
Not like this.
This was
I'm just saying guys getting like 60, 70 yards.
JT Sanders toasted them.
Right.
Brammer from Iowa State had
Kansas
a good game
State
against them. Sinnett, he was pretty good. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess that's pretty fair. Yeah, I mean, this was like a avalanche, though, from Jarrett Wiley. I mean, he was getting revenge on the quote-unquote hometown team for sure.
Yeah.
He's from Temple.
Right. So he gets the big 17-yard gain right out of the gates. Josh Hoover slinging it on around. They very quickly get into Baylor territory. They've got 1st and goal at the 8, throw for 6, get down 2nd and goal at the 2. And here they're going to go up 7-0 just like that. But a great play by Cooper Lands to force the fumble. And Caden Jenkins, who we'll talk about later, he is able to scoop it up and return it, for a 10-yard gain after the fact. Or no, it was longer than that. I guess it was officially 10 yards.
Because the ball got kicked out.
Kicked around,
so by the time he picked it up. But at first when I saw this play, I know it's Cooper Lands who forced the fumble. But at first I thought it was a butt fumble, like the Mark Sanchez play, because he just ran to his offensive lineman. But it was clear that Cooper actually did get his hand in there and forced fumble. And Caden Jenkins, Johnny on the spot again, a guy who just recommitted to Baylor this week. On Twitter, on social media. So, yeah, big play by the true freshman who's had an awesome year.
So the ball's kicked around, and eventually Caden Jenkins is able to pick it up, and by the time he's brought down, they're all the way out to the 31-yard line. And it was a huge play, obviously, as TCU was just 2 yards away from taking an early lead. So massive turnover there for the Bears and a little bit of excitement, and they actually turned that into something. An 11-play, 69-yard drive. A lot of different folks getting involved, from Dom Richardson to Monterey, not so much Monterey Baldwin, to Dawson Pendergrass, to not so much Keytron Jackson.
This was one of those drives where you and I sit here and talk about how boring the offense is and how they can't create explosive plays. Well, here's the deal. Monterey Baldwin, you got to catch the football.
Yep.
I mean, that was right in his hands. Keytron's was a little bit more difficult because he's kind of looking up behind him and it's just kind of falling. He had to readjust. Monterey's was like, that's a play that, if you ask Monterey, he's catching that ball 10 out of 10 times, but not in this game. Drops it.
Yeah, what would have been a huge play instead as a drop. Keytron Jackson, not as had a little bit higher of a difficulty level, but another good teams make those plays, and so 2 huge whiffs in the passing game where Shapen put it in a pretty good spot.
50-plus yard throws,
Yeah, and so instead you're just, there's a loss of down and get back to the drawing board, and to their credit, they overcame that, and they were able to drive 11 plays and 69 yards in a little over 4 minutes. Eventually, it is Blake Shapen to Dominic Richardson for a 10-yard touchdown, and it is 7-0 Baylor after this opening drive after the fumble recovery.
Yeah, this was one of the best drives of the year for Blake Shapen. He was awesome on this drive. I know the 2 drops, but that throw to Jake Roberts was just money, and then the 3rd and 4 conversion to Josh Cameron was great as well. This was a great drive by Blake Shapen.
Yes, it was. So they kicked the ball back, and TCU proceeds of great drives up till the end. 16 plays, 83 freaking yards, 6.5 minutes off the clock. Kendall Browse doing his thing. And they're able to maneuver the ball down the field, tons of plays, tons of time off the clock, and then another whoopsie there down near the goal line for TCU as they turn it over on downs. On 4th and 1 at the Baylor 6, after not getting anything on 3rd and 1 at the Baylor 6, they say, you know what, we're rolling up our sleeves and we're going to get this yard and have 1st and goal at the 5. And Baylor makes a play on defense, stuffs Savion Williams, and they turn the ball over on downs on a 16-play drive. They turn the ball over on downs at the Baylor 6-yard line. So now you're like, what the heck? Defense has made 2 massive stops back-to-back. Don't look behind the curtain. Never mind the fact that TCU was at the 5-yard line both times or right on the goal line both times, and then they made a stop. Never mind all that. They made a stop. So another huge play. This is where it basically ends for the defense on the day, however, is drive number 2. But nonetheless, they, were able to, make some things happen early on at least.
Yeah, and this kind of felt like the drive that Baylor needed to have. this next one, and they weren't able to get it going, but it felt like if you could drive all the way down the field and score again, get up 14-0, it really felt like you could kind of take control of the game a little bit, and obviously that, as we're going to get to, that doesn't happen at all. But yeah, just keep in mind, Baylor or TCU, two drives inside the 5. It's going to be a reoccurring theme coming up here in a minute.
Yes, it will be. So, the turnovers mask what was the defense getting pushed back all the way up to their backs were against the wall. But they make a couple plays. That's what you have to do when you can't, just get the 3 and outs. But nevertheless, this is basically where it would stop because Baylor gets the ball back. They are able to move it all of 3 yards. 3 yards. 1st and 10, pass complete for 3 yards. 2nd and 7, run for no gain. 3rd and 7, passing complete. 4th and 7 from the 9-yard line. Punt out of bounds. So that was an impressive drive for this offense. Yeah. TCU gets the ball with great field position, which would now be another common theme as well. And they proceed to go, okay, enough of this bull junk. We've already should have been up 14-0 or 14. It should be 14-7 at this point. We're down 7-0. No more. 5 plays, 40 yards. Amani Bailey, 27-yard touchdown run, and now it's tied up. After all of that, it's tied up. And we're just getting started here.
Yeah, and a complete whiff of a tackle by Chateau Reed on that Amani Bailey touch. It's been just so reoccurring for Baylor. I mean, it's not just guys missing tackles. I mean, we're talking not even touching him, not even slowing down the running back, just a complete whiff. And if you whiff on the initial tackle like that, you're going to give up touchdowns. You're going to give up explosive plays. They gave up one there. A bad look, and now a third drive that has gone inside the 5, this one for a touchdown.
3 for 3 is TCU at this point. So Baylor gets the ball back, and in a common theme this week as well is turning the ball over on downs. 9 plays, 62 yards. They get it all the way down to the TCU 8-yard line. I'm thinking kick the field goal here, but they decide to go for it on 4th and 3, and Dominic Richardson's only he gets stopped, right?
Yeah, for -5 yards.
Okay, it says 5 here.
Yeah,
that's
but
why.
I think he lost like every inch of a yard. And it was, Craig, how many times are we going to sit here and continue to hear that Baylor runs the ball on 3rd and 4 or whatever to get closer so that then they can go for it on 4th down? How many times has that really worked this year for Baylor? It hasn't. Yeah. It really hasn't. You're putting your team at such a disservice because this team is so much better when they're able to throw the ball with Blake Shapen on downs that aren't obvious passing downs. But obviously they think different, so they run the ball on 3rd down and then run it again on 4th down and get stuffed. And you're exactly right. I would have just kicked field goal there, but nope.
Nope. And I mean, you know what? Looking at the final score, it wouldn't have made much of a difference, but you don't know that because at least you get points and then you're like, okay, it's, 10-7 and you at least are getting points, but instead you're stuffed, you lose yardage, and it is now TCU football. 2 plays, 87 yards, and game's over after this, basically. 2 plays, 87 yards as Jared Wiley hits the 81-yard gain on the pass from Josh Hoover, and it is all of a sudden 14-7 TCU.
Yeah, nobody near him. Just ran us right down the seam. Touchdown, complete blown coverage. And, when you give up an 81-yard touchdown to a tight end, guy's got to be wide open. So, a tough play and kind of exactly what you see, right? You decide, you're not going to kick field goal. 2 plays later, you're down 14-7.
This is those are the sequences that just drive you mad, and that's where you're like, okay, they can't possibly do this again. They can't do this for another 12 games where – it's missed tackles, it's blown assignments, it's not being in the right spot. It is week 11 of the season, or week 12 actually, but it's game 11. How are these still issues? And then it's the young guys are playing, but we've heard that all year long too. It's just, if it's not one thing, it's another thing. But the thing is, we hear all of the same things all of the time. And so those are what the issues are. And so you can't, correct everything, and it is what it is in some cases, but that's the stuff that's all right, how are you going to convince the folks that need to be convinced that that's going to be all that different next year? And that's I guess, what they're trying to, in Aranda's case, figure out right now, but also prepare for this final game. So it is suddenly 14-7. Baylor is able to go on a pretty lengthy drive, 11 plays, but just 44 yards, and they end up with an opportunity to maybe put some points on the board, but they can't get any farther than the TCU 29-yard line, end up settling for a 48-yard field goal, which is good and not to be taken for granted. But this time they kicked the field goal, and granted they're a little farther back, but maybe learned their lesson on the previous try, and this was a longer conversion as well. But no matter, 48-yard field goal is good, and that would do it before halftime, as a TCU would get the ball back, and quite frankly, with 43 seconds left, plenty of time to go and score, but then Josh Hoover got sacked, and that basically ruined their chances, and they just let the clock run out. So they go into the half up 14-10. At this point, I was feeling pretty okay that it was a close game, definitely left some points on the board. Defense hasn't stopped jack other than a couple of turnovers, but hey, it's 14-10. That's doable in the second half.
Yeah, no punts for TCU. No, really the only thing stopping them was themselves in this football game, and they made it inside the 5 every single drive outside of the one where they only had one play, which was right before the half. So yeah, 14-10, you feel like, hey, Baylor's still in this game, and Baylor was moving the football. Like, you kind of felt like Baylor could score in the 20s, in the high 20s, maybe even 30 if they actually converted their chances.
Yes, so it's 14-10 coming out of the half. TCU gets the ball first, and they have a beautiful opening drive. 9 plays, 81 yards, and this one ends with, guess who? Jared Wiley, 28-yard touchdown. By the way, he was the Big 12 Offensive Player of the Week, and I by the end of the game, I had a really annoying reoccurrence that has been also part of the season all year long as well, where the announcers inevitably by the end are needing things to talk about, and they're like, man, if this team could just play like this every week, and it's like, yeah, they're playing Baylor. That's kind of that's what everybody's been doing.
And the announcers got every name wrong on the football field the entire day. It was just a terrible performance. Sorry, I actually listened to the audio in the game. It was really hard to listen to, but I think this actually for me was when the game was over. Because, yes, Jarrett Wiley scores a touchdown, but it is absolutely 1,000% how he scored this touchdown. Y'all, it is 3rd and 25 at the Baylor 28-yard line. And Baylor comes out in press coverage on 3rd and 25. Like, it's not like you're going to get beat over the top. You just have the end zone there. You got to keep everything in front of you. And what does Baylor do? Just leave the tight end wide open, who beat his man, and then he just runs right into the end zone, gets hit after the first down marker. I mean, it was that I could not believe what I was watching, that they were in press coverage instead of playing off and seeing the ball in front of them. I could not believe it. You give up that touchdown, I felt like, okay, Baylor's not getting a stop all day, is what that felt like.
And so, yeah, you hear the score there, and then you hear Grayson's description, and you realize it was even worse than you imagined. And take this into consideration. Jared Wiley, on just 2 catches on the past 2 drives, has over 100 yards receiving. On 2 catches over the course of 2 drives. Including, yes, a 28-yard touchdown on 3rd and 25. That is just absolutely inexcusable. Like, no good teams give up any types of plays like that ever. And if there has to be, I don't even want to justify and make it sound like it happens with any sort of occurrence. That is just awful. And I'll just leave it there before I start going off the rails with how bad that is. 3rd and 25, you give a 28-yard touchdown. So it's 21-17 TCU at this point. It's 21-10 TCU at this point. And here's really the last hurrah of this entire football game, as Baylor would respond. Their first drive of the second half, 7 plays, 75 yards. Pretty nice little drive. Blake Shapen runs it in from 2 yards out after a big gain to Drake Dabney on the play before, where he goes for nearly 50 yards on the gain on 1st and 10, taking it from midfield all the way down to the 2. And then it's Shapen right afterwards. And this is about as healthy as he would be for the rest of the game as well. But he takes it in, and so it is 21-17. And you're like, all right, there's a bit of life here. Despite all the mistakes, there's been a little bit of life. And this is about, like I said, where that would start to go to the wayside.
Yeah, another good drive for Shapen here. 24 rushing yards, and then that 48-yard pass to Dabney. Great catch by Dabney, too, who's looking just better and better each week. I I think I agree with Travis Roeder, who's written on the site a few times. He looks like a guy who could get drafted, and I kind of think he will. He's had a very, very nice year for the Bears, and yes, you're exactly right. This was pretty much the last bit of momentum Baylor would have.
So let's not try to break this down too scientific just to save ourselves time, but TCU would just go ahead and say, screw this mess. We're going to go blow this thing open now. So they go 9 plays, 83 yards. It's 28-17. Josh Hoover runs it in from 3 yards out. Baylor, 9-play drive. They turn it over on downs when a 4th and 11 pass at midfield falls incomplete to Dawson Pendergrass.
Talk about having no confidence in your defense. 4th and 11 at the 50. And you could punt it, pin them deep. You're only down 11, and instead they don't. Also on that other drive, Josh Hoover running all over Baylor. Also inexcusable. But, yep, 28-17.
It was 35-17 after they would get the ball back after the stuff at midfield and go 8 plays, 50 yards. Trey Sanders, 2-yard touchdown run. It's 35-17. Baylor turns it over on downs again. 4 plays, all of 6 yards gained. TCU gets the ball back. 1 play, 31 yards. Amani Bailey, touchdown. It's 42-17. Baylor gets the ball back. 7 plays, 16 yards gained. Turn it over on downs again. TCU turns it over on downs to basically close out the game as it almost feels like they called off the dogs, quite frankly. I don't think that they would have, given it was Kendall Browse and he was trying to score as much as possible, and they did go for it on 4th and 10 at the Baylor 23. But that fell incomplete, and that's the only thing that saved them from not giving up more points because there was still 2:45 left on the clock, and if they would have gotten a first down, best believe they're punching that in. So no punts on the day for TCU. You had them turn it over on a fumble and on downs, and then at the end on downs as well. But other than that, they scored touchdowns on every single drive. Yeah. 42-17 is what ends up being your final, as a game that was at one point in time, 21-17, ends with a 21-0 run where all Baylor does on their drives to close the game are turn it over on downs every single time, while TCU scores every single time, touchdowns, not just scores, except for the final drive where they were still deep in Baylor territory and a first down away from adding another touchdown eventually as well. So absolute bloodbath for the last quarter and a half of this game. Wasn't a real pretty performance in general. Managed to stay close for a good little while despite some mistakes, but by the end of it, this just felt like a lot of the other ones and felt like a really bad loss. Not embarrassing, but borderline embarrassing depending on who you want to talk to. Like, I'm just at this point kind of numb to it, I'll be honest with you. So my embarrassment levels are just sort of non-existent at this point.
No, this was embarrassing.
Fair enough. Call whatever you want to.
4-6 team that you just got blown out by. This is absolutely embarrassing. TCU was 2-5 in conference play coming into this game. I know people might think they're better than that, sure, but they're probably going to lose this weekend and be 5-7. And you lost 42-17 to them. I don't know. To me, that's pretty embarrassing. And also, we need to mention in this game, Blake Shapen is out there down 42-17 with 2:40 left. He takes a huge hit, and now he's probably not playing in their final game. He's out there for no reason, and yeah, now he's hurt.
Yeah, there was a lot of talk about that after the fact, but Blake Shapen was out there for their next to last drive, and he does get dinged, and he is now most likely out for this final game, as he was just dealing with all sorts of things. I mean, taking a bunch of hits, which is par for the course, and then by the end of it, Dave Aranda having to go to Sawyer Robertson there at the end to close this thing out on the final drive, or I guess midway through the final drive, because that's when Shapen got hurt, was on the final drive. But Sawyer Robertson closes it out, so to speak, and by the end of it, we're hearing Aranda in the postgame talk about head and chest injuries being looked at, and I don't know what they eventually settled on because they're still technically monitoring him this week, but it feels like they are not going to not have him available. And Jack said his head is what that's what he said. He did say that. That's right. I forgot that he did clarify. So, it is a head injury.
And he talked about Sawyer and how Sawyer's going to get a great chance. He basically said Sawyer's
He basically said it without saying it, But, he did clarify, so thanks, Jack, for reminding me of that.
And I do want to mention Blake Shapen. I mean, if he doesn't play this weekend, I felt like he's played about as well as you possibly could given the circumstances. He's been a warrior for this team. I've been so impressed by him. The step he's taken as a leader, the step he's taken as a player. He got a lot of flack coming into this year, and a lot of people were saying, he's not the guy, he can't do this. And I know the results haven't been good for the team, but I have felt like he's probably been their best player all year.
Literally, other than Drake Dabney on offense, their best player. And you can make the argument he was better than Drake Dabney because of all he had to do.
And Dabney was really only solid when Chapin has been playing.
Yeah, so fair enough. So best player on offense, and then probably best player on the team because who on defense?
Caden Jenkins is
we're going just off the fact he's had interceptions. Are we really breaking it down all the way to the ground?
He's had some tough stretches here and there, as Blake has as well. But Blake's been their best.
Their best player, and he gets hurt at the very end of this game on the final drive, and people, of course, wondering why he's even in there. And that's easy to say after the fact, but it's a valid point, especially when he's gotten as dinged up as he has. So now. Likely out, we'll see. But anytime you're talking about a head injury just days after the fact, just simply knowing what he's going to have in front of him again, are you going to throw him out there against West Virginia and just hope that game 12's when the offensive line's able to protect him finally? So,
this is a Sora Robertson game. And that great for him. He needs the reps. And we kind of need to see what Baylor has in him as well.
Yeah, so looking like that'll probably be the case, but that was it. That was the game. 42-17, TCU, their fourth straight win in this series. They've dominated for the last decade. Ever since 61-58, the Bears have won just one single game in this series. That was 2019. Was it 2019? Yeah, with Matt Rule.
Yeah, the triple overtime game. That was absurd.
Trying to get my years right as far as his tenure. 2017 was his first year. So
John
2019.
59-yarder or something crazy.
So, and they've beaten them in every way imaginable. Blowouts, done that. Home and away, done that. Close games, home and away, done that.
The Jalen Rager just win a game with one play.
Score a bunch of points, win. Score a few points, win. Give up a bunch of points, still win. Give up a few points, still win. Any scenario, they've done it. Any scenario they've won over the last decade, and Baylor's managed just the one win. So the Blue Bonnet battle goes to TCU, and they get to keep that trophy up there in Fort Worth. And
good.
and have that, and honestly, I know there's still a rivalry aspect, but this was so. By the end of it, I'm like, this doesn't even feel like a rivalry at this point. I'm sure if your boots on the ground there, if you're TCU or Baylor grad, you feel like it, but just from the outside, you would have no indication this was a rivalry. And so here we are, where it's the final week of the season, and it's West Virginia week. And Grayson, your thoughts, I guess, as they get ready for one more ride here in 2023.
Yeah, they're going to be facing a team that's had a really nice bounce back year in West Virginia. They're 7-4 on the year, looking to get that 8th win for Neil Brown. Let's not forget they had to play on the road at Penn State at the very beginning of the year. So, this team has been a very quality team all season long, and they can run the ball very effectively with C.J. Donaldson, Jaheim White. They have a good quarterback in Garrett Green, who is very much a dual threat. Very, very good runner, a guy who can definitely hurt you with his legs, which Baylor has struggled with all year. And I expect West Virginia to come in here and just run the football as much as they possibly can. And we'll see if Baylor adjusts. We'll see if the seniors really step up and have a great performance. Gabe Hall, TJ Franklin, Matt Jones, what do those guys bring to the table in this game to try to stop that attack? And then on the flip side, defensively, West Virginia can give up points. They can get beat there. But this Baylor offense has been inconsistent. And so if Sora Robertson's going to have success, I think it's going to come with his legs, and then they're going to have to hit on some deep shots if they're going to want to keep this game close, because I fully expect West Virginia to put up 30-something points on Baylor, and I'm not sure if Baylor can get to that number.
Baylor hasn't put up more than 25 in a month.
Yeah.
Since they beat Cincinnati 32-29, they've only put up 30 4 times this year. Texas State, when they gave up 42 and scored 31. They won 36-35 over UCF in the fourth quarter comeback. 32 against Cincinnati on the road. And what was the other one I'm missing here? Long Island. Did I say Long Island?
No, I think
okay. I skipped over the 30 points against Long Island. So, like I was saying about the offense at the start, the defense is an issue. They're giving up all sorts of points and lots of points. They're giving up 42, 59, on average at least 30 a game.
Yeah.
But the offense is struggling to hit the mid-20s on a regular basis, and 30 is oh man, that's a special treat. So, not trying to pile on here, but it's just bad. It's just bad all the way around. And now there's one more game to go to kind of try to save face a little bit and go out with a win for your seniors and go out with a win on your home turf, which if you don't would mean that you finish 1-7 at home this year. So, that's 2-6 is better, but it's not great. And so, there's the little things to play for, like getting a win at home, getting a win on senior day. But, nothing grander beyond that as far as bowl games been off the table for a couple weeks. And now it's just a matter of, what happens after this game's over with, right? What happens in this game, I guess? Let's just enjoy one more game, no matter how tough it's been. But then after that, what happens after that game's over with? That is the million-dollar question for this football team at the moment.
I think so, too, regardless win or lose, because I think the answer's probably going to be the same, regardless of what happens in this game. And I fully expect Baylor to not win this game. But I think that is the biggest question going into this. This matchup against West Virginia is not great anyways. It's going to take a very a performance from Baylor that we haven't seen all year for them to win this game. And I don't see why that would happen in game number 12.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, why would that change all of a sudden? But Garrett Green has been pretty effective. He's had some not so great moments. He's still growing as a quarterback in some ways, but he's very experienced, very good running the football, improving as a passer. I wouldn't expect you to give up 400 yards like you did to Josh Hoover, but who the heck knows at this point? For sure fear what they're going to give up on the running game, though, with Donaldson, White, Green. I mean, that trio alone did a lot of damage last week for West Virginia on the ground as they were able to just pile up the yardage against Cincinnati.
424 yards rushing. I mean, they ran all over them. Garrett Green and Jaheim White carried the day. Donaldson had kind of limited reps in that game, but Green has gotten a lot better, and I will give West Virginia a ton of credit here. Their offense has taken a huge step forward since their defense kind of started taking a step back about midway through the season, and that's been very impressive to watch. You and I were both, when Neil Brown was hired, we both liked the hire, and it just hadn't worked out for a variety of reasons, but I'm happy for him. They've had a good year. They've really rebounded nicely, even despite all the criticism, despite being picked 14th, which was an absolute joke in the conference preseason poll, and now they are where they are with a chance to finish 6-3 in conference play, which would be a very, very good year for that school and that team.
Yeah, and also give them a chance to go 8-4 in the regular season, and then win 9 games if they can, win a bowl game. So that would seem to save the job of one Neil Brown already. But certainly, if they were able to pull that off, you would expect they're going to be 8-4, and that would be a good enough showing to get the run back to next year. But also, they're just an improved football team, but there is still plenty of angst in that fan base that still does not believe he's the guy.
For sure.
But if you go out and you win 8-9 games, you can't fire that guy, because what message does that send to the next head coach of when we just get tired of you, it really doesn't matter how many games you win, we're just going to fire you anyways. Oh, sign me up, please, for that job.
Yeah, I do think they have a lot of veterans on this team, and so maybe that's why West Virginia fans are weary, because it's kind of this was the perfect storm. They went 8-4, and now next year's going to be a down year. But I think they got some things trending in the right direction. There's some young guys that are playing for them as well. I've been impressed with their style of play and how they've won some of these games.
Yeah, and those young guys include all of the runners that we've mentioned. Garrett Green and C.J. Donaldson and Jaheim White all would be back next year on paper, at least. So there's something amongst other things to build around. Anything you want to dive into with them? They have a good defense. They have an offense that at times is very dynamic, but certainly can run the football pretty effectively, and showed that last week. There's some weeks where it's a little hit or miss. I think that kind of depends on the opponent, quite frankly. But against Baylor, again, not trying to pile on, but I mean, I don't think they're going to shut down the run game and then, force Garrett. I don't think they're going to do any of that. So I'm curious to see, what West Virginia brings to the table. But, based on the Baylor defense and their struggles offensively, it's kind of hard to see too many paths here to victory unless they just play a really sharp game and get turnovers and convert turnovers and do all of the little things that winning teams do, but that have been sort of hard to come by this year.
Well, I mean, since the Houston game, which, as we know, they lost on a Hail Mary crazy play, they are scoring at a very high rate. They had 39 against Houston, 34 against Oklahoma State, 41 against Central Florida, 37 against BYU, 20 against Oklahoma where they got blown out, and then 42 against Cincinnati. So I mean, against a Baylor defense that's probably the worst in the Big 12, or at least right there in the conversation, I mean, they shouldn't have much problem scoring probably 34-plus points. And that's an issue for Baylor because Baylor's not scoring at that kind of level. I think Baylor could probably score 20-something on them, but I don't think you're going to be able to get to that 34 number. They run the ball very efficiently. That's been a big thing for them. They've been running for pretty much over 5 yards a carry the entire year. I think 5.1 yards per carry for the entire season, 9.2 yards per carry against Cincinnati. So really got rolling there. And the pass game has just been about efficiency for Garrett Green. He'll make mistakes. He'll turn the ball over here and there, but his ability to run the football and then guide the offense just enough throwing the football really sets up their run game. And so, again, they're going to attack Baylor in a variety of ways. Honestly, this offense is a little different than most that Baylor has played this year. Just with his dynamic ability as a runner, it's very, very different. And then they're very physical up front as well. Defensively, like I've said, they've had some problems this year at times. You know, they've given up over 400 yards of total offense 5 times, so they can get got there. And they're probably going to give up 300 yards to Baylor, but Baylor's probably going to need 400, honestly, to win this game, and I don't see them getting there.
Yeah, hard to imagine that they hit that mark.
Yeah.
They are very much a case study in having yards, though, and then not resulting in points.
Terrible red zone offense.
So if anybody's going to score 400 yards and have like 23 points off of that, it would be the Baylor Bears.
It's them, Cincinnati, and UCF.
Yeah.
They all are like, oh yeah, 400 yards, easy. And then you look at the scoreboard, and it's like UCF had 480 yards against Tech this weekend. They scored 23 points. Mm-hmm. It's just one of those things. If you're not efficient on third down or in the red zone, it's very, very difficult to be consistent.
So right now, as it stands, Cincinnati is a slight favorite in this game coming up this weekend. 6.5 is what I saw at last glance, and I'll check
Virginia,
again.
you mean?
Or who did I say? Cincinnati. West Virginia.
I think it's 8.5 now. Oh,
Okay.
This is going to blow up. Since Shapen basically got ruled out, I bet this ends at like 11 or 12.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. There's time, a couple more days to go. I guess more than that, actually, a handful of days to go until this game. But yeah, it's now up to 8.5 in some spots. So yeah, there you go. 8.5 point favorites on the road, mind you, as well. They're 8.5 point favorites. So not surprising when you're 1-6 at home and you're 3-7 or 3-8 overall. But man, what a tough year, and TCU just the latest chapter in what has been a tough year. And now we'll see what finishing touches West Virginia wants to put on this thing. But that'll about do it for that, because we do have other things to cover. And I mean, I don't think it's like early on in the year when things are going really competitive, you're like all about the breakdown of the game. Everybody, I think, now wants to hear about how do you fix this thing. So one of the things from this past week, at least news-wise, Grayson, was the talk about GXG Exchange, which is the NIL wing of around this program, and they are, I guess, tweaking kind of the operations as far as what was more so a mindset of like everybody is equal and everybody gets paid the same, and that way we don't have any like this guy's better than that guy. And it's a nice idea, but everybody's on the same footing no matter who you are. Lovely idea, but not realistic. And that was the approach previously. Now they're saying, all right, we've got to change things up, and we do have to, in some cases, pay the star wide receiver, whether it's a high school player or it's a transfer portal guy or it's a guy on our team already. We have to pay these guys, and some of these guys we're going to have to pay more than these other guys. And yeah, Caden Jenkins deserves to get paid more money than 95% of the team. Blake Shapen deserves to get paid more than everybody on the team practically. And instead, they were making the same as like the long snapper, and so that was basically where they were. And again, it's a nice idea, but it's just not sustainable, and clearly it's not helping matters on the field in any way, shape, or form. And so they are pivoting, changing, adapting, whatever you want to call it. NIL gets to be such a touchy conversation around these parts, but they are changing things up, and they're going to go more on, I guess, would you say, as an individual pursuit or basis. And so what are your thoughts on that, what difference that makes, and, just the idea in general of what they're trying to accomplish here?
Right. It's more about fair market value now. And so it's going to be very representative of what you bring on the field is what you make off the field. And that's kind of what the hope is from this, whereas it had been just everyone gets the same amount of money, which that was never going to be sustainable. It was interesting because Dave Aranda mentioned that he had been a big, I guess, I don't even know how he wanted to put it, a problem with their ability to get better at NIL or become more innovative and creative with it. He kind of alluded to that in his press conference, which was very interesting to hear. But yeah, I think this is going to be great for this team because it allows you to kind of go out and find some guys that are maybe higher end talents in the transfer portal. It also allows you to retain guys. And then in recruiting, it gives recruits a ceiling that they can get to, which is very, very important because obviously if you're like, hey, you're going to make $20,000 for 4 years at Baylor, that's just what you're going to make every single year. That's very different than at another school that says, hey, you're going to make $20,000 your freshman year, but you have the chance to make $100,000 a year or something along those lines. That's going to be very important for this program and a very nice change for Baylor because as we know, they've been doing fine when it comes to total money that they've been using NIL-wise when it comes to them versus the rest of the Big 12, but it was the high-end potential that was kind of dragging behind, and now they've answered that.
Yes, and so that plays into an NIL decision that was seemingly made prior to the game. I didn't love the timing because my worst fears were realized when TCU went and blew them out. So it kind of, pushed to the side the great news from before the game. But that news was that Caden Jenkins, their freshman defensive back, had, after some days of teasing that a decision was on the horizon, which you're like, okay, here we go. And Aranda's already admitted in multiple interviews here lately of like their guys are getting recruited. It's fully transparent. I mean, it's not a secret. And no surprise that Caden Jenkins would be one of those guys. But you wondered, is like he going to bail right before the TCU game? Like, what are we talking about here? And then on Saturday morning, after some teasing, he eventually puts out that he's staying with Baylor, basically. Again, probably would have been better on Sunday because then at least you like wash the taste out of the loss, out of your mouth of the loss. But regardless, beggars can't be choosers. And so you want Caden Jenkins back. In theory, you have him back. I still don't think, like, if there's a coaching change, like, do we have to do this all over again? That's my question. But, he recommitted to Baylor, which is just a sign of the times that you're even doing that with a guy who's not even been around for an entire year yet, that you're recommitting publicly. But that is this era, for better or worse. And so take good news where you can get it, and that was obviously good news. So your thoughts on Caden Jenkins, and he won't be the only one. I mean, there's already other guys getting recruited. I think you look at who's getting playing time, who isn't. I would imagine like somebody's probably had to reach out to Richard Reese at this point and go like, hey, why aren't you running the football at all this year? Or any of the young guys in the secondary, or maybe Drake Dabney, who's got a year of eligibility left, or whoever you think would be valuable and have an offer out there, they probably have an offer or getting talked to at this point.
I think Dabney's done, isn't he?
I don't think so.
He's not?
With a COVID year too?
Yeah, I think his COVID year. I'd have to look, but I think so. I thought he was done.
Okay, maybe so. But
either way, I get what you're saying. I mean, and that's going to be something that it was a huge conversation on my chat this week. Everyone asking, who are the players who could transfer and all this. I'm not going to get into speculation. I think you can look at the roster and kind of have guesses as to what's going to happen and who might decide to leave.
Bro, he's a fourth-year senior.
Okay, so he does have another.
He's got a couple years, I guess, if you had the COVID year, right?
Well, because he didn't redshirt, that eliminates one of the possibilities of a year, doesn't it? I don't know. But
when you have the redshirt and a COVID year,
and he was 2019 prospect.
He's a true senior this year.
Okay. Well, either way, if he does have another year, I still think he's probably going to go pro.
Yeah, probably. But I mean, somebody that sees him is like, hey, you want to play college football? Here's $100,000 if you want to come play at Ohio State or whatever. That's the point of the whole mention here.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, I think in general, you can kind of get a sense for who is going to be here, who might decide to look at the transfer portal, and then also who Baylor's going to look at to try to spend NIL money on, right, to try to keep. And we know a focal point is going to be the young players. We know that that's definitely going to be an area that they keep in mind and definitely try to attack. And that's why Caden Jenkins was so big, because he's a true freshman who's already flashed. And you got to show that you're going to be able to pay those type of players premium money to be able to keep them. And so that's huge. That's huge for this program. It definitely sets a precedent going forward, a good one, in my opinion, because you got to be able to take care of guys. Fair market value is the biggest thing now. And now they have a higher ceiling at Baylor through NIL, which is going to be very, very good for recruiting, and especially for the transfer portal and for your current roster, which is going to be massive. I mean, we heard Mike Elko this week for Duke. He's like, this year's going to be crazy in the transfer portal. It's going to be just nuts, Wild West type stuff, and I fully expect that to happen for many programs, including probably Baylor.
Yeah, and he's at a school like Duke, so of course he's going to throw out the Wild West stuff, especially at a school like that. But it's, he's going to be as affected as anybody likely will be, because he doesn't have Michigan money or A&M money to sit there and let's just load it up and get the cash ready. He's got to talk about it and be a little bit more fearful of it, I think. And I think if you're Baylor, you do to some extent as well. And so they responded by tweaking some approach to the NIL market. And yeah, it's weird to think that now you're having to worry about money for your current team, your money for your incoming recruits, and then your money for the transfer portal guys, which would lump into the incoming recruits. But incoming recruits, I'm more or less talking about your natural recruiting that you do, the traditional recruiting that you do. So yeah, now the money's being divvied up in all those ways, and that's just to maintain and bring in guys, not to mention everything else that you have to still tweak and fix and work on. But yeah, I mean, at least there's a proper monetary focus and setup when it comes to the roster. Not that there hasn't been before, but it's just being talked about a bit more because of the circumstances and the fact that they are going to more of an individual player-by-player approach. And so if you are a big-time player, you will command more money than everybody else on the team, and that just only makes sense in the long run. So they tried it one way, didn't work to the best of their abilities, and so now they'll try it like everybody else has basically already been doing, as Aranda pointed out. He's pretty sure everybody in the Big 12 is already doing it this way. Everybody around the country is pretty much doing it this way. And as you said, it's not even so much a dollar figure that Baylor is struggling with. It's just partly the approach and probably the aggressiveness, and that's some of that falls on Aranda. And he has maintained that he's willing to change, and he's not opposed to changing. It's part of growing as a head coach. The question is whether or not he'll have the opportunity to do that. And that's, again, what we're waiting to find out here over the coming days, because until you know that, you don't really know where to start looking for what's to come. We just know that there's like a flash flood coming down the pipeline, and like here in the next few days, it's going to round that corner. It's just a matter of like, what boat are you on, and or you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
How do you plan on surviving it? And we're just waiting for that time to start. But man, the countdown is on. That's for sure. So I guess anything else notes-wise as far as football goes here?
No, let's jump in the mailbag. We got a lot of questions this week. We'll probably answer some of the things that we would talk about anyways.
All right, and I know there's basketball going on as well, men's and women's, but we got plenty of time for that, and I think we got a lot of football kind of on the front burner right now.
We'll be able to recap kind of what happened to Baylor. They got a couple big games this week, so we'll recap that next week for sure.
Yep, so just stay tuned for some of the basketball talk to come, but pretty football focused right now with all the issues at hand. Ginger Bear will kick off the mailbag. How does a team decline as quickly as Baylor has? I know youth NIL recruiting mistakes are several factors, but I still don't understand how Baylor could get this bad so quickly and not really improve at all this season. And to hear him talk, they have improved. Like, you just don't see it. The younger guys have gotten better, but man, it's really hard to see. And it's like I said a couple weeks ago, it's like, I'll never pretend to be an X's and O's expert. It's just not my forte, what have you. But I don't need to be to see that, like, I shouldn't have to need the James Webb telescope to see like the little bit of improvement because it's hard to see, man. It really is hard to see. And I don't think you need to be a football expert to see it necessarily.
Right. And so, I mean, answering this question, I think everything comes down to how poorly they evaluated this roster. I mean, it's very clear they need more transfers. They need more impact older guys to come in and help this team survive this season, especially on the offensive line. And then, I mean, even defensively, they need more bodies, more guys who were older and veteran leaders, and they didn't have it. And that's how you decline quickly nowadays. I mean, it's the same reason why Texas State goes from being one of the worst teams in Division I to being like an 8-4 team.
Oh, they've lost more than that.
Okay, well, 7-5, whatever it may be, but they're still, it's a huge improvement from where they were, and it's because they took like 50 transfers. So things can shift quickly if you don't attack the portal quickly enough. If you don't attack it enough, you can leave holes on your roster. And I think that's specifically what Baylor did this year.
Yeah, they're 6-5, and at the same time, you're right. But at the same time, Dion did the whole roster makeover, and it's worked out.
But they're still much better than they were a year ago.
Yeah, they're better.
Like and their problem was their depth got crushed, too. Right. So as the season went on, they've been drastically worse because they don't have the depth behind, the guys that they got in the portal. But I just think, like, that's the thing you can point to the most is they just missed the evaluation. There's no way Dave Aranda can sit there and say he still thinks this is a Big 12 title roster. What was that, like a month and a half ago, 2 months ago? And then we look at what we see on the field. Like that, there's just a confusion between the two things there, and it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I also don't want to lay it all at the talent's feet or the players' feet because in some cases they're already young guys and they do need time to grow, and they're not like 5-star freshmen that just roll into Austin or Norman and are ready to play right away, and they do need some time to develop. But because of the roster they're having to play as much as they are, or because of injuries, which aren't anybody's fault really. But, the coaching deserves some blame as well. I think across the board, you can look at the coaching staff, and I don't think there's anybody you just go like, no, everything's good. No, the offensive line is not good. The offense is not good. The wide receivers are not totally better. The running backs are worse. And all that plays into each other. So it's not like it's A.J. Stewart's fault that the line can't block for the run game and so on, or that, they can't give Shapen time to hit the receivers and allow them to get open. But I mean, when you look around, like, what's better?
The only position that I can point to, honestly, this year is probably the coach that was on that people were the most concerned about, which was cornerbacks, Kevin Curtis.
Yeah,
I mean, bringing in Caden Jenkins.
Yeah.
I mean, they were terrible a year ago. They've been better.
Yeah,
they've recruited well too.
But coming off of last year, you're kind of hoping for more than that, and so it's been tough. In your opinion, what's the probability Aranda and the rest of the staff are fired after this season? It's sad to say, but given our record this season, I don't see a good argument for keeping Aranda next season. Thanks for all that y'all do. Appreciate y'all's positive yet realistic commentary. Not ask hope is lost for Baylor football. We will rise from the ashes, sick and bears. Well, thank you, Ginger Bear, for the very nice words, and appreciate you being a part of the show.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, I mentioned that I'm leaning towards that direction, so I'd probably put it at, honestly, right now, I think it's at like 70% that they're going to be fired. That's where I'm at. I think they make a change.
I'd say 65-70% is probably about fair because I still would lean to it. If I had to put money on it, I'd say he's back. But I feel less and less confident as the days go by. So it's about 65-70%. Big Cheese 83. If staff members are let go after the game on Saturday, when do you think it'll be announced? Do you think it'll be fairly immediate post-game Sunday morning, or will it bleed into next week?
I would bet Sunday we would get an answer on I don't know if you come out with a statement if he's staying. I don't really know how that happens. But I think if he's going to be fired, I would think that it would be Sunday.
I would think word gets out on Sunday, and it's kind of already out there because that's typically how it's already happened with some other jobs. So, I think you start maybe even Saturday night, depending on how it goes down and how the game goes and all of that. But, it's probably I'd say pre-Monday if there's going to be massive changes at the top. If it's a coordinator or something, that might wait till Monday. But yeah, that's probably about what it would be. Scotty B, the Baylor King, would impress you most about the Baylor women's basketball win over Utah. For me, it's not allowing Utah to have a lead in a single second. We're short on time here, Scotty. That's a great win for them. Yeah. A big-time win for them over Utah, though. But, yeah, I don't have a lot of thoughts on what impressed me most.
Huge, and I think for me it was their depth, something they didn't really have last year, but having Yaya Felder and Jada Walker and Dariana Littlepage-Buggs score 9 and 7 points to go along with all the double-digit scores. They had 4 players in double digits. I mean, they really showed a lot more depth than they did at any time last year.
JBear19, how can leaving Blake in for that last series be justified? In my opinion, it can. If I'm personally deciding whether Aranda needs to be let go or stay, it pushes me to the fire category. One example of many of absolutely horrendous game management. I hope for Blake's sake this is just a one-week thing and does not linger. Shout out to Shapen for his Warrior play throughout the year. Never once let up or publicly complained about the play around him. I'm very proud he's a Baylor Bear. Well said on Shapen.
That's awesome. Yeah, great for Shapen. I mean, I can't justify it. I mean, it was ridiculous. 2 minutes and 44 seconds left for him to be out there. And then, obviously, he takes that hit, and it's exactly why he shouldn't be out there. So, yeah, I was very, that was awful to see. But yes, I love what you said about Blake Shapen. It has been a true warrior type season for him. He dealt with an injury, came back, kept playing hard even when they were struggling. And yeah, I think any Baylor fan should be proud of kind of what he's given to the program this year.
Yeah, and if he got a little bit of help here and there, maybe they do win a couple more games, but there's those big drops, or there's not blocking, or there's no run game to rely on, or you do score and then your defense gives up a touchdown right away. There's just this total lack of complementary football that's been in place all year long. And, like we said earlier, probably the best player on the team overall, 1B at worst. But, he's had a solid year given the circumstances for sure. And I think a lot of people have grown to appreciate him more because of that. Useless Kim Degree, have y'all heard anything surrounding how many players will leave this offseason? I know Baylor has a small recruiting class for high school, so they have enough room to reshape the roster. So go ahead and answer that first.
Yeah, again, I'm not really sure an exact number, but I do think there's going to be a lot of changes. And if there's a new coach, it's going to be, I would think that if a new coach comes in, it's probably going to be like 20 to 25 players shake up on the roster. If Aranda stays, I still think it'll probably be like 10 to 15, maybe even more than that. But yeah, it's going to be a huge shakeup. They're going to have to bring in a lot of transfers. The small recruiting class helps that. So yeah, I think that's where they're at this point. And then did you read bonus question?
I was going to. Bonus question, what's the first thing you are doing to celebrate the close of this season following Saturday night?
Probably I'm going to be with family, so maybe have, I don't know, a glass of whiskey or something.
Yeah.
I'm going to need something.
Take a deep breath and just be thankful that, I don't want to, dunk too much on the team and football careers ending and all of that, So I'm not trying to rub salt in the wound, like I said earlier. But yeah, I'm going to take a big deep breath and just go, okay, at least we don't have to talk about that for a while. And we can start focusing on the fun changes, because change is fun in the off season. You don't know what it's going to turn into, but you're able to reset and be optimistic that it's all going to be for the better. Like last year's off season when you thought this is all going to be great, and then reality hits. But in the meantime, you think it's great at the time. And so I'm looking forward to having some positive news and momentum going on, because it's been a little while.
Yeah, and it's been sad for me because 2018 was my first class that I covered recruiting-wise, and a lot of these guys were in that class. So it's going to be tough to see them leave and just leave on this kind of sour note. So, TJ Franklin, Gabe Hall, Matt Jones, Garmin Randolph. Tough to see.
Overrated. Would you rather see the Big 12 in a 4-way tie for first or a 6-way tie for second?
4-way tie for first.
Confusing, right? Confusing stuff. Weird stuff by the Big 12 last week to try we're not changing anything, but I didn't like that. I thought that was a mishandling of the situation, which has not been the case really too often here as of late, but I think that was. But I root for chaos, and I would love to see somehow two of the holdovers find their way in there, but that's basically impossible at this point.
Yeah, I want the 4-way tie for first, because that's the only scenario both Texas and Oklahoma don't get into the Big 12 championship.
So there you go, 4-way tie for first.
Hopefully Oklahoma State, K-State's the Big 12 title.
Yes.
Probably won't be, though.
Probably not. Probably Oklahoma State, Texas, which I don't know how great that would actually be. When Ollie Gordon's basically your entire offense and Texas doesn't give up any running whatsoever. So knock on wood that somehow we get the chaos scenario, and if not, then let's hope Oklahoma State finds some things to be able to figure out and do against Texas. Rockwall Bear, love you guys. Big hugs all around. Appreciate that. Happy Thanksgiving to you and yours. Bear Sack is the last season with OU and UT in the conference. Why is down? What's your more preferred outcome? Who makes it a Big 12 championship game, and who do you want to win it all? We're just saying, I would prefer it to be Oklahoma State beats Texas, or somehow K-State gets in there and they beat Texas. Or
I want Oklahoma State to win the Big 12, because I'm still a little salty about what Chris Kleiman did late in that game against Baylor.
That
was pretty ridiculous, throwing on first down up by 30-something points. But so I'm cheering for Oklahoma State to win it.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about that, but I could totally see that. So, yeah, I'll go ahead and say Oklahoma State as well. And after their heartbreak a couple of years ago at the hands of Baylor, be great for them to be able to hoist that Big 12 trophy. So, yeah, Oklahoma State getting the win would be cool, but, man, it's just hard to picture that right at the moment. Ollie Gordon being as good as he is regardless. Let's see, ZT Smith 423, what would you consider the strength in the team going into next year if nothing changes, the offense or defense?
If nothing changes, then it's probably Blake Shapen and then the cornerbacks, which is what we already saw. The receivers should be a little better with Keytron and Monterey, but even even they were a little disappointing this year.
Monorail gets some NIL offers too, I bet.
Yeah, and I mean, he'll probably get one from Baylor too, but he was so inconsistent this year at times. He also had an amazing stretch during the season. But yeah, I mean, Blake Shapen's probably your strength. I mean,
yeah, and as much as we've just complimented him, I don't know that that's like really what you want to bank your big year on, because you got to surround him with more than just your quarterback being your best guy. Like, okay, that's great, but is somebody blocking for him? Is somebody catching the football when he throws it? Is somebody running when he doesn't have to be the guy with the ball in his hands?
Get better in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Doc Crowell, let's say the offensive staff is let go, as some have suggested, and Randy gets one more year. Does he stick with a wide zone offensive mind or get whoever he can get? I know Dino Babers is available now. They're not sure he's interested in any head coach positions, and I don't know what his feelings would be. He was on the Brile staff back in the day, so I don't know if he's got any ill will. I don't know that. I'm just saying that's one thing to maybe keep in mind, but anyways, what are your thoughts here?
I think he probably goes away from the wide zone. Probably goes spread offense of some kind.
I think you have to.
But I don't know that it matters.
Right.
Like you're bringing in a guy who's just coming in during a season where you're on the hot seat. That's a really tough ask for any offensive coordinator. So I would assume he'd go spread though.
I just don't know how you can run the wide zone if you can't block.
Right.
I mean, if you're retooling the entire offensive line and guarantee that it's going to work out, then I guess you would stick with it. But no, if you're moving on from a coordinator on offense, you're not sticking with the same offense. That would be pointless.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Doc, I don't know about the suggestion or just the mention of Dino, because like I said, and not sure what his plans are after the Syracuse firing, but yeah, they definitely would change up the offense. Flomo Mike, for schools like Baylor, are NIL dollars better spent on high school recruits or up-and-coming sophomores and juniors in college? Thankful for you all. You're entertaining, provide great info, even when the performance is not as expected on the field. Well, Flomo Mike, thank you. Appreciate you. And great that you're a listener of ours. Thank you.
The dollars are better spent on transfer portal and guys on your roster. I think the big thing for high school players is that you're showing them a path to making more money if they play well. I think that's what Baylor has to sell to high school athletes, not the initial payment, in my eyes. I just think that's more sustainable for a program like Baylor. You pay for the guys that you know are good, the proven commodities, and then you go from there and you allow your younger guys to kind of grow into that.
Yeah, I think I think you got. Oh man, I think it's just a balancing act at this point. I think if at Baylor, you got to have a little bit of both. Like, I think you have to have the high school recruits that you kind of bring up, but you can't let that, like, this year be the focus and be like a big part of your team. Mm-hmm. You need to have the veterans, and not just veterans, but like proven, can like execute and play right now veterans, not roll in and they need to develop for a couple of years. I mean, what's the point? So. Yeah, I think it's going to have to be spread all around, honestly. I think you're going to have to, like I said earlier, you got to pay the incoming high school guys or JUCO guys. You got to pay the guys on your team right now, and you got to pay the transfer portal veterans who need to be impact players right away. Right. So I don't know if there's a better spent. I think it's kind of for them in their scenario right now. It's across the board, but if you could get ready-made, ready-to-play right now guys in the transfer portal, that's how you get this thing turned around the quickest. So that might be where you'd want to focus if you can pull that off. Brick Park will close us out. Thank you, Mike. When a coach is fired, does that give a blanket waiver for any player on the team to transfer? I'm wondering if guys like Sawyer Robertson, Keetron Jackson would be allowed to transfer without sitting a year since they have already used their one free transfer.
I think when a coaching change happens, you can transfer. I think you're allowed to transfer whenever. I don't know that for sure, but I'm pretty sure on that. So I think they could leave if there is a coaching change.
Yeah, but there's the one-time transfer rule, so I don't know how that comes into play with a coaching change, though.
With a coaching, and they've already transferred, but then a coaching change, does that, pass the one-time transfer rule? Well, I'm not really sure.
Guess we've got to learn that because we're going to probably be talking about that to some extent. But yeah, I don't know. Off the top of my head, I get confused with they should not be eligible to transfer based on the fact they just transferred. But if you throw a coaching change into that, I don't know, given that we talk about this all day, every day, like what's past and what's still speculation, right. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know where we are in all of it at this point with that particular rule. So, I don't know. I'm trying to look up if there's anything here recently on that, but
I'll answer it next week. Okay. I'll get a better answer for him.
Yeah, so we will see on that, and there's all sorts of articles here that are popping up as far as...
Sawyer might graduate, I would think, so he'd be able to transfer as a grad transfer, kind of like what Tyler Shuck is doing at Texas Tech, and Keetron might be in the same boat, actually. He might be able to. I don't know how far he's down on his eligibility.
Here we go. There are 3 reasons why an undergrad transfer waiver. So if you graduate, obviously you can go wherever you want to. So yeah, if Sawyer graduated, he could go. But for the way to be a multiple time transfer for reasons related to their physical or mental well-being due to circumstances outside the control, assertions involving. Okay, that's not what I was looking for.
We'll answer it next week. But Craig, we got to get into our quick prediction of Baylor, West Virginia before we head out today. We got a lot of stuff coming up in the studio. So Baylor versus West Virginia.
West Virginia wins. Yeah, yeah.
What do you got for the
by at least 10?
Score?
By at least 10.
At least 10.
Yeah, probably 38. 23.
Okay.
Something like that.
So you think Baylor will compete? Kind
of maybe like last week for a little while. Yeah. And then eventually the Mountaineers pull away.
Yeah, I got West Virginia 34-20. I think they're just the better football team, and sadly Baylor goes out on senior night with the tough loss. But I will get that question answered in the mailbag next week. Go back and look through that.
Yeah, I want to make sure we get it right, and we are short on time. So, Brick, thank you for the question, and we'll roll back around to that. But guess what? We'll have plenty of time to talk about these sorts of things moving forward because there's only one game to go. And next week, it'll be full on to the offseason and then also into basketball as well. But it's going to be a busy football offseason, that's for sure. And most of this podcast will remain dedicated to that as usual. So, yeah, get ready for a lot of news coming out. Anything before we go here?
No, I think that's it for this week. But we'll be back with a big week next week. A lot to talk about, I'm sure.
Yep, or at least some answers to some questions. That will have it the very minimum. But thank you for the production behind the scenes by Jack McKenzie. Thank you to Grayson Grundhoefer as well. And thanks to all of you that watch either on the Baylor Athletics on Sikkim 365 page, which if you're on there, please hit like and subscribe, or after the fact on your favorite podcast app. Thankful for all of you out there listening. Have a great Thanksgiving week, and we will talk to you next Tuesday. It's been the Bearcast on Sikkim365.com and Baylor Athletics on Sikkim365 YouTube page.